Welcome to This is What Democracy Sounds Like. I'm Kevin Prang. This program is a presentation of Metropolitan Congregations United. MCU is a community organization that brings together religious congregations, community groups, and individuals to work for a common purpose, to create a better life for all residents of the region. We work at the intersection of race, economy, political power, gender, and the structures of oppression that work within us individually, within our organization, and within the community. We are working towards building people's control of the government, building community control of the economy, expanding the public sphere, and creating structural racial equity. Today, our guests are Lisa Thompson, an organizer on MCU's Education Task Force, and Hopey Fink, staff attorney of the Education Justice Program of Legal Services of Eastern Missouri. We'll be talking about what the MCU Education Task Force has been working on, issues that have come up at schools during the pandemic and remote learning, how MCU and Legal Services of Eastern Missouri have worked together, and then how parents can advocate for their children. So welcome and thank you for being here.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you.
Lisa, first of all, catch us up to date on the issues that MCU's Education Task Force has been focused on.
MCU's Education Task Force is part of our Break the Pipeline campaign at MCU, which is short for Break the School to Prison Pipeline. So we're the school piece of that. And what that pipeline is basically that when kids become disassociated with school or pushed out of school for various reasons, usually discipline, they may not see school as the place for them. They don't have a desire to finish school. And oftentimes those kids end up in the juvenile justice system and then into prison. So the Education Task Force works on, really our main goal is to keep kids in school and to make sure that they get services that will help them stay there, that will help them have appropriate behavior and help them identify with school as a good place that is meant for them to be there and it is inclusive of them. And unfortunately, children who are Black or brown are often disproportionately affected by those push-out strategies. I'm a former teacher myself. I would like to say that in defense of the education system, it's usually not an intentional, malicious thing to push kids out, but it's often to try to protect the learning environment, support teachers, and sometimes in misdirected ways. Oftentimes, what we feel is misdirected ways are punitive types of discipline, where it's punishment oriented or serving time for whatever infraction that you have done. And so MCU's Education Task Force has worked for a number of years on reducing out of school suspension, which is a big push out for kids, literally and figuratively. There are definitely discipline problems, and teachers shouldn't have to just look the other way when a child is really disrupting their classroom, but there are other ways to handle it. And so MCU's task force has really pushed districts to look at trauma-informed education and guidance techniques, which means just understanding that kids that have behavioral issues often have a lot of other baggage and so may react differently to authority figures and punitive discipline. We've also looked at using restorative discipline practices, which means a more of a community focus and looking at the harm done to the community, and then having the person who committed some kind of infraction repair that harm done to the community rather than be pushed out of the community. They are called in and kind of wrapped around by the community and asked to repair the damage, to address the victim or fix whatever they broke, and then come back into the community so that there is healing there rather than maybe a situation where there's going to be tit for tat revenge or something later in that situation. And then just making sure that kids through their schools, because that's where we have our children, is that those kids are connected to mental health and behavioral health treatment resources. So MCU doesn't do those direct services. That's not the kind of organization we are. We look at the systems. So we are basically, the task force asks questions of the districts, the boards, the superintendents, sometimes principals, and tries to push them to go in these directions with their services and away from more of the punitive suspension type discipline.
Okay. And so what types of things or what kind of changes and problems have been coming up since we've been in distance learning and since the pandemic has hit? And what is MCU kind of doing to address those?
That's a really good question because, the other thing we look at is if kids are put out of school, that they have access to continuing their education and not getting so behind that they're going to give up because they've gotten so behind while they were out, that there's no way to repair their grades and things. So the distance learning has kind of created some of those same situations. And again, kids that are Black and brown and poor have less access to those things they need for virtual education too. The schools have been pretty good, I would say. The districts that we've been in touch with, and from what I've heard, have been very good about getting kids access to computers and hotspots and Wi-Fi. But that doesn't solve all the problems. Oftentimes there are multiple kids in the family that are trying to access the Wi-Fi, and that can be very difficult. Also, we've been concerned in making sure that kids who, by checking in with districts, making sure that there is some access to the special education services that kids are required by law to have services for their special needs. We've also been trying to make sure that parents are involved in the decision-making process, and then also trying to just keep continuing, if it doesn't seem like there'd be that many discipline issues with virtual learning, but occasionally there are. And so making sure that a child's not suspended from virtual learning, even if there's some kind of discipline issue. Recently, because of I think every district is having trouble with at least a minority probably of their kids just not logging in to school and not getting to their virtual school classes. And so attendance has become a real issue. Grades have dropped. And we recently were given a letter that went out from one of the St. Louis public middle schools to a number of parents that was extremely punitive in tone, and basically said that, we are going to, if this continues, call social services. You could be reported, you could be fined, you can be held responsible for your child's truancy. And it seemed like a pretty harsh step to the task force when we read that in this time when parents are struggling so much to try to keep their jobs as well as have their kids in school, that it seemed pretty harsh. And so we wrote a letter to the school board about that and asked whether this was their policy to be sending these kinds of letters. It went from the school board to Superintendent Adams, who didn't know about the letter and wasn't real happy. And we ended up meeting with a number of members of the public school administration, the principal of that middle school, a a network superintendent who is the next person above the principal as far as authority, and then a deputy superintendent in charge of the students, I believe, student services. And they were all rather apologetic. They said this was a new social worker who had sent the letter out, and that they basically that is the standard letter that they send to people that have had truancy, or families that have had truancy problems, but that is used only after a number of steps and contacts and support. So we have another follow-up meeting with them and are going to suggest strongly that maybe that letter could be rewritten to have a little different tone, and to we realize that they have an illegal obligation to notify parents of those things, but that perhaps it could be done in a little different way with a little more support on, or emphasis on support for the parents rather than punishment.
Almost asking the district to find solutions instead of just slapping punishment, huh?
Yeah, and exactly. And at that same meeting, we did also talk to them about restorative discipline practices. That is listed as one of their options in their student handbook as far as consequences of infractions of the discipline policy, but it seems to be sporadic as far as the amount of training that people get, and sounds like it's up to the principals of individual buildings as to whether or not they use it. And it doesn't seem to be widely used, and we would love to have them doing that in more schools as more of a consistent practice and philosophy of the district.
Okay, great. Now, Hopey, I understand that you and Legal Services played a part in this particular issue. Tell us how you collaborated with MCU.
Well, we are part of the MCU Education Task Force, so we attend the meetings where we were discussing this issue as it kind of came up and strategizing a bit. I wasn't able to go to the meeting with the SLPS administrator, so I'm really grateful that MCU really took the lead in this collaborative approach, which we attempted to support kind of with legal research. And I think that's how we work well together is, in being able to do some of that, taking on like a legal angle. And, I think this issue is really exemplary of where, right, there is this legal obligation, as Lisa said, that this district has to do this reporting, but COVID-19 has just, I think, shown, first of all, some of these flaws in how the laws work, and they've really exacerbated and shifted the landscape and forced districts to reimagine how they're applying some of these legal frameworks. So we continue to monitor this issue as MCU does, and kind of think about next steps, because it does fit into, I think, broader patterns that we have certainly seen with our clients and that the MCU Education Task Force has been tackling both before and during COVID-19, including, as Lisa was saying, this need for trauma-informed anti-racist policies, as well as looking at the digital divide and how that affects attendance. And in addition, kind of the surveillance and criminalization aspects of this particular letter. That's very concerning to us. And we're just continuing to, I think, monitor that and how it relates to these broader systems and the legal frameworks. It's something that we certainly want to hear from families about, and I think MCU shares this. And with our approach of kind of combining this collaborative approach with other legal strategies, that hearing directly from families is really important as well.
In a case like this, does your organization generally hear from a group like MCU, or is it families that you are that call attention to cases like this? How do you get involved, or how do you get pulled in?
Yeah, in all sorts of ways, and we certainly community partners like MCU are, especially during the pandemic, just more important now than ever for getting us plugged into what's happening in the community. Our approach is a community lawyering model. So we really are trying to listen to what's actually happening on the ground instead of just being lawyers locked away in some room somewhere trying to think of what's happening. And it's been hard to connect with families during the pandemic when a lot of things are, virtual. I think that's something a lot of our community partners have echoed, is just this need to hear from families. But we do have this great network of advocates and organizers and others who are on the ground kind of listening. So we have a hotline, and we do hear from families directly that way. But certainly all of our community partnerships are so valuable, and plugging into teachers and other parts of people related to schools, working in schools, that's all feeding, how we can work together on these issues.
Kevin, oftentimes I think there is such a desire, like Hopey said, of trying to connect directly with families. And we would love to have more parents of kids who are actually involved in the school systems right now on our task force. Right now, we have quite a few retired teachers. And, and I think it kind of makes sense. We have the desire to have parents, but oftentimes parents don't realize there's a problem with the system until their child is in trouble somehow. And then they're often overwhelmed trying to keep their job and meet with the school, and don't always know where to look for resources. So just, trying to make sure that parents are informed of resources. And then sometimes we get tips from teachers who don't like the way the system is treating the children, but don't feel like they have enough power, or maybe there's too much risk for their job for them to address it very directly themselves. So we'd love to have more people that are directly involved in the system, but that can be really hard, and we understand why that's difficult. But we get some parents too who have been involved in a discipline issue within their district that could have gone poorly or was starting to go poorly. They reached out for resources and were able to work through it into a better resolution. And so like Latricia Gandy, who is one of our MCU organizers, has spoken frequently about her experience with her son in a school district. And that kind of motivated her to reach out to help other parents. And so we definitely are open to more parent involvement. And you don't have to be an expert. You don't have to be a teacher. You don't have to be a lawyer to be involved. We love to have people that are directly having the experience.
I think the thing about education is that pretty much everyone knows someone who, we've all been gone through different, systems ourselves, and then know people. And so it is something where I think every perspective is so valuable.
Okay, great. So we want more parents involved. So what's the best way, Lisa, for parents to contact the Education Task Force and say, here's what I'm up against?
Well, definitely, I think the easiest way is to contact the MCU office. The phone number is 314-367-3484. And like I said, just leave a message either on the machine or with the office manager, and we will get your contact information and get back to you. And like I said, you can always look at the website, which is MCUSTLewis.org. You can go to the website, you'll find our phone number or address. Any way you can get in touch with the office, and our office manager will get your name out to us, and we'll get in contact with you.
Okay. And Hopey, what's the best way for folks to contact your organization?
Sure. Well, our Education Justice Program does have a hotline, which is 314-256-8789. And you can also email us at ejp@lsem.org. We also have an intake line and a website for our entire organization. We cover a lot of other issues in our other departments. So the legal services website will have information about that as well.
Okay. And can you speak a little bit more about how things can kind of get quickly out of hand if a parent is sort of taken by surprise by a discipline action and doesn't have the tools that they need going into talking with the school in the school district?
Yeah, I mean, we certainly want parents and guardians to feel empowered, and they can do a lot as advocates for their children, knowing their children and knowing their system. But districts also can get away with a lot. And, if especially you're experiencing issues with exclusion or access, that could be a point where having an advocate, whether that's a lay advocate or a legal advocate, really can help navigate when the school might be crossing a line, which is one reason we do a lot of Know Your Rights presentations in the community and trying to really empower parents with knowing where that line is when it comes to their legal rights. And certainly we encourage then parents, if you feel that your school or your district is not responding appropriately to a situation with your child, you can always call our hotline and we can either take on the case or give a referral to other resources.
Okay. And you guys have a new tool that you're promoting to help parents. Can you tell us about that?
We do. It's called the EdRights App. And this grew out of the Know Your Rights presentations that we've been doing in the community for several years. This resource is a way for parents to kind of carry around in their pocket what we would be presenting on in a presentation, and have that easy access to a reference that goes over their legal rights. So currently it covers school access and school discipline issues. And it's an interface that's pretty easy to use and navigable, just kind of clicking through to find what your situation is and then what rights you have in a particular situation. And the cool thing is it's actually a website that behaves like an app. So there is a URL, which you can find at lsem.org/edrights-app. And from there, you can either access the website through that URL on your desktop or laptop. You can also install it on your phone or tablet home screen, which will allow some of that information to be stored on your device, and you can use it then without internet, which was really important to us as we were developing this app because of the digital divide and because we know that oftentimes when you need that resource, then sometimes it's not in a situation where internet is easily accessible. So you can also share the app really easily through the URL, and hopefully we're wanting to empower parents, also students, including unaccompanied youth, and community partners who are working with families to be able to navigate easily and go through the app in that way. And I will say we're having a Facebook Live presentation on February 9th at 2 p.m. to go over the EdRights app and how it can help families. We're basically just going to be doing a demonstration of how you would be able to first install it and sign up for notifications and use all of the features of the app. So please join us for that if you're interested in learning more.
And I think that parent advocacy is something that we're really advocating more and more, that those most affected by the systems should be the ones that are empowered, because they know how it's in fact affecting them the most. And it also is the greatest source of power for pushing back on abusive systems. And that goes for the school districts as well as our legal justice system. And we've built quite a nice little group for the juvenile justice program to do the same type of thing. And if you need that type of connection, also make the same contact. Hopey, let's finish up. Tell us a little bit more about Legal Services of Eastern Missouri. What else do you guys cover? And then give us the contact information one more time.
Sure. Our program, the Education Justice Program, really targets the root causes of education inequity. So we're focusing on a lot of the same priorities as MCU's Education Task Force, and using a racial justice lens and this community lawyering model to look at systemic issues, mostly through impact litigation, but also these outreach and community education tools. We have as well another education unit, the Children's Legal Alliance. They do a lot of individual representation. We also cover anything from family law to public benefits to some immigration cases. We have a housing unit, a consumer law unit, small business development unit, really any civil legal assistance. And Legal Services of Eastern Missouri covers a 21 county region in Eastern Missouri, and we serve low-income individuals and the elderly. So we do have an income eligibility requirement, but all of our civil legal assistance is free. And we also provide holistic social work for all of our legal clients. So really trying to tackle the many angles of injustice and oppression that affect a lot of our clients. If you want to contact the Legal Services of Eastern Missouri intake line, we actually have two different numbers for that. One is toll free at 800-444-0514, or you can also call it 314-534-4200, and we have interpretation services available when you call that intake line. You can also check us out on our Legal Services website and Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, whatever works for you.
Okay, great. I want to thank our guest today, Lisa Thompson, an organizer of MCU's Education Task Force, and Hopey Fink, staff attorney with the Education Justice Program of Legal Services of Eastern Missouri. And as we've said a couple of times, to learn more about MCU, go to the Metropolitan Congregations United website at mcustlewis.org. Also be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for news and events and for information on how you can become involved. I'm Kevin Prang, and you've been listening to This Is What Democracy Sounds Like. Tune in again next time, and thank you for listening.